In the early stages of the Clone War, the planet of Christophsis was the location for an important strategic battle between the Republic and the Separatists. On one side was the Republic forces led by Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker, and on the other was the Separatist forces led by General Loathsome and Asajj Ventress. The Republic was struggling after breaking through the blockade thanks to the traitorous clone trooper Slick, but Admiral Yularen managed to get one transport to the Republic forces. The Jedi expected some sort of reinforcements, which was why they were surprised when the young Togruta Jedi Ahsoka Tano stepped out. Anakin was even more surprised that Ahsoka had been assigned as his new Padawan, and was soon annoyed by her impulsive actions on the battlefield. Nevertheless, the Jedi Knight later accepted her as his Padawan, and the two formed an unbreakable bond until war's end. But what if Ahsoka died on Christophsis? How would Anakin react? How would Yoda feel about sending Ahsoka to her demise? Several hours after Anakin had been given a new Padawan, he was beginning to wonder what Obi-Wan and the Jedi Council had set him up for. As the Jedi Knight watched the LR-57 combat droids that Ahsoka had accidentally activated move menacingly towards him, his number of near-death experiences has seemingly multiplied from today alone. The Jedi exuded a reluctant sigh as he ignited his lightsaber and yelled over the top of the incoming droids toward Ahsoka to lay the charges and to destroy the shield generator. As he quickly glanced at Ahsoka scurrying along the ever-shifting ground, Anakin had an epiphany. The Jedi in front of him had similar traits to himself, and just as Obi-Wan had done for him, she needed his guidance. Just as Anakin arrived at this realization, he sensed danger in the Force, and he looked to see Ahsoka with a combat droid hovering behind her. Anakin roared to his Padawan to warn her of the threat, but it was too late. The cannon-ended arms of the droid thrusted into Ahsoka's backpack and subsequently through her spine. Anakin didn't even have the chance to get to her, as the droid threw the dying Jedi over the wall of the generator site. A massive roar shook Christophsis to its core, and Anakin was the source. The eyes of the Jedi now flickered with yellow. His lightsaber, which had dropped to his side, was now raised above his head. Just like on Tatooine several months ago, nothing would be spared. But for all his desire for revenge, their mission was already over. Ahsoka had somehow detonated the charges and destroyed the generator in her fall. So it was with these feelings of emptiness and revenge that Anakin trudged back to the Republic base, where the surviving forces were also travelling to. Anakin had declined the offer to board a Republic gunship, so he was the last to arrive, and everyone looked mournfully towards the missing Padawan. Even in her brief time with the clones, her enthusiasm had left an impression, but it was Yoda who looked the saddest. The Grandmaster felt responsible for Ahsoka's loss, as he was the one to dispatch her to Christophsis, and he also worried about Anakin. His plan to teach Anakin about attachment was up in flames, so he decided he would send Anakin back to Coruscant and have another Jedi take his place for the mission to Teth. Anakin reluctantly complied and walked off to take transport from the fleet as Obi-Wan looked concerned. Looking down towards Grandmaster Yoda, the wise and old Jedi's face showed that Obi-Wan was not alone in this concern, and they feared that Anakin's future in the Jedi was a risk. As Anakin guided one of the Jedi starfighters from the Republic fleet, he was already thinking what the Jedi were fearing, and after the loss of Shmi on Tatooine, and now Ahsoka, he remembered a conversation he had with Qui-Gon on Tatooine. Anakin had been confused and in denial when the Jedi Master told him that he wasn't on Tatooine to free the slaves. Now armed with knowledge of the Jedi, Anakin saw that they were thinking less and less about people in the galaxy, and were only considering the Republic. Jedi such as Ahsoka were being given accelerated training for the war, and even if their skills were ready, Anakin knew the war was no place for a child. The Jedi Knight returned to Coruscant with these heavy thoughts, and instead of going to the Jedi Temple for his prescribed rest, he travelled to the one person who had been there after his massacre of the Tusken Raiders, Senator Padme Amidala. The Naboo politician had been increasingly worried when Anakin had told her to meet him at their apartment. After all, she had just set up a meeting with Palpatine, whilst Anakin was supposed to be transferring from Christophsis to Teth. Such was her busy schedule, she was still in her senatorial clothes when Anakin arrived, and at her first glimpse of him through the canopy of his starfighter, she was right to be worried. Padme rushed outside to the dog starfighter and ushered Anakin inside, with C-3PO and R2-D2 following them. Anakin was consoled by the Senator for the loss of Ahsoka, and the Jedi Knight revealed his doubts about the Jedi. Padme couldn't deny that their role as peacekeepers had shifted, especially after the introduction of the Clone Army from the Military Creation Act. Also, she had seen at first hand the difficulty of combating slavery, and the Jedi were being held back by the Republic. Padme understood Anakin's desire to leave the Order, and she watched as he made the trip to the temple to seal his departure. Anakin barely registered the temple guards allowing him through, and all the younglings and initiates who were training turned towards him and talked in hushed whispers. The Jedi Knight's legs felt incredibly heavy as he ascended every step to the Council's location, and finally he approached the tall doors to the chamber. Most of the 12 Jedi were present in hologram form, owing to the call of battle, and Anakin bowed to the Masters. Yoda sensed Anakin's conflicting emotions, and after his talk with Obi-Wan, he knew Anakin was about to announce his departure from the Order. The Jedi Knight was honest in his explanation, and much like Dooku, he told them about his disillusion from the recent activities of the Order. Yoda allowed Anakin to keep his lightsaber, anticipating a future use for it, and with one final bow to Obi-Wan, he left the Council Tower. The news of Anakin's departure quickly spread through the temple and the rest of the galaxy, but Anakin largely ignored the news as he began life outside the Jedi. Without the direction that the Jedi life had given him, Anakin initially felt lost, but with the help of Padme, he decided to do what the Jedi had failed, which was to help those outside of the Republic, especially slaves. With a renewed purpose, Anakin initially thought about returning to Tatooine, but some scars remained too close to home. Thankfully, Padme and her handmaiden Sabe had done prior research, and listened to the rumours circulating through the Senate, and he decided his first target would be the facility on Kaddavo. The volcanic planet located in wild space was one of the colonies occupied by the Ziggerian slave traders, and from Anakin's own extended research, Ziggerians would routinely use the world to detain slaves, and also to scout slaves to sell in their auctions on Zygeria. The former Jedi declined the help of Padme's handmaidens, and also resisted the urge to ask Rex and the 501st Legion, only taking R2-D2 to help him. Instead of using his Jedi starfighter, which the Council had allowed him to keep, Anakin snuck aboard a YV-865 freighter used by the Zygerians. The former Jedi did this as the ship was used to the presence of live cargo in the form of slaves, but he also wanted to examine the slavers and slaves on board. This proved to be a test of Anakin's stealth, which had never been one of Anakin's strong points, and it was one he would fail. He had been trying to access the ship's Navi computer and its data log of locations, but whilst most slave transports only had one pilot slaver and a number of crew members, this particular one also had a number of trained guards, and he was caught before he returned to his stowaway. Anakin was placed amongst the slaves in their cages, and those around him looked at him with confusion. But what the other slaves had not accounted for was R2-D2. Anakin activated a hidden communicator that he had kept in his shoe, and the faithful astromech opened the door to its own hiding place. The droid did a much better job of evading the Zygerians than Anakin, and when it glided to the corridor of cages, the droid stunned the one guard patrol, then moved to Anakin. The latest captive quickly positioned himself at the front of the cage, and over the top of the other desperate slaves, R2-D2 unlocked the collars and cuffs. Though the other slaves pleaded to be freed as well, their pleas were silenced when R2-D2 gave Anakin his lightsaber, and the former Jedi Knight promised them all that he had a plan. Anakin lifted the key from the stunned guard and placed it into the lock, and released himself back into the corridor of the ship. After he promised to the slaves again that he would return, he decided that he had waited enough, and on their approach to Kaddavo, he sliced the guards until only the pilot remained. The normally intimidating looking Zygerian was reduced to spluttering noises when Anakin raised his hand to choke him with the Force. The former slave demanded to know the location of other slave facilities, as well as the important figures in the hierarchy of the slave empire. Through his increasingly constricted breaths, the Zygerian pilot protested his innocence and claimed that he was merely a subordinate of the Kaddavo facility's commander, but Anakin was not convinced. The sound of Anakin's lightsaber igniting broke the Zygerian's resolve, and he finally revealed that he was actually part of Zygerian Queen Mirage Sintel's chain of command. Anakin ordered the slaver to lower the ship as they approached the docking area, and buried amongst the acrid smog, he got his first glimpse of the slave facility. The large complex was sat on top of one of the thousands of volcanic pits on the planet, but what got Anakin's attention were the sensations of pain from those below. Anakin's grip on his lightsaber tightened in anger, and he vowed to free those within the building and destroy it. Upon landing, Anakin kept his lightsaber on the slaver's neck, and behind his back, he signaled for R2-D2 to begin unlocking the cages. The slaves were freed one by the little astromech before they started to free each other, and they also hoarded the Ziggerian's electro whips. As Anakin pushed the slaver down the ramp, he saw more slavers waiting for their latest consignment of slaves. When they saw him, the electro whips of the slavers were quickly pulled from their belt to their hand, and Anakin signaled to the slaves behind him to attack. Unlike the patrolling Ziggerians aboard the ship, those on the ground were fully fledged and equipped royal guards with blaster rifles and electro staffs. Their ruthless attitude and unwavering loyalty to the slave empire was evident, and Anakin knew that he and the slaves would need to be careful. As more Ziggerian guards rushed out from different corners, Anakin started to block the incoming blaster bolts and screamed to the Ziggerians to free the others, whilst he distracted the guards. To help the slaves, Anakin moved from the docking area to the outside, but this exposed him to the incoming Hutt fighters. The ships fired in his direction with their double laser cannons, so Anakin bravely moved closer to the royal guards in the hope that the fighters would pull away and avoid hitting their own guards. This bold strategy was initially successful, as the royal guards scattered towards the edges of the facility, putting them at risk of dropping into the volcano. But the group led by Agras now formed a circle to trap Anakin and the other slaves. As more and more slaves were being freed, Anakin could hear the Hutt fighters circling back to his spot, so he asked R2-D2 to provide a distraction. The astromech was still on board the same freighter, and now took control to distract the enemy fighters. The medium laser cannons were now put to full use, and below the dogfight, Anakin seized the initiative. The royal guards that were near the edge were either pushed into oblivion or were force pulled into Anakin's blade, so they tried to work together and use the range of their electro whips. Anakin was now forced on the defensive, but the freed slaves emerged from the slowly crumbling and smoking facility and repelled the guards attacking Anakin with their strength in numbers. The lightsaber wielder now ordered for everyone to move to the closest ship and leave the planet. Those who had been enslaved on Kaddavo didn't need any more encouragement, and with a salute to the departing slaves, Anakin boarded the battered freighter that R2-D2 kept in the air, leaving behind a furious Agras. With its extensive damage, Anakin gauged that the ship would not be able to travel into the mid-rim, and unfortunately, he would have to go to Zyggeria. This unfortunate realization soon turned to disaster, as the Ziggerians had obviously discovered the destruction of the Kaddavo facility, and another wave of Hutt fighters were quickly on his tail. Anakin now did not have any other choice other than Zyggeria, and he asked R2-D2 to take control of the laser cannons, whilst he focused on a landing. Despite R2-D2 picking off a few of the Hutt fighters, Anakin could not slow down, and they began plummeting through the clouds. With a quick scan of the area, Anakin eyed a rather ominous looking fortress, and landed the ship as smoothly as he could. The Hutt fighters did not fire at him, but they did surround him when he landed, and he had to think of a solution. As he left the cockpit, he caught sight of the impaled slavers that he had fought earlier, and saw that their uniforms were more or less intact. Anakin equipped a uniform and instructed R2-D2 to remain by his side, as it seemed the Ziggerians had not paid attention to the astromech. So when Anakin emerged, the Ziggerians were confused and quickly suspicious. The disguised slaver sensed their suspicions, and in a confident voice that betrayed his real emotions, he told them that he was here as part of the royal slave auction. The heads of the slavers turned to the battered ship and the rather empty interior, then unleashed their weapons on Anakin. Instead of fighting the slavers, Anakin persisted with his disguise and demanded a meeting with Queen Sintel to explain the situation. The Ziggerian commander Darth Stanar now stepped forward from the entrance of the fortress, and the others fell silent. The ruthless slave ordered the others to move out of the way and told them to leave this one for himself. Anakin subtly handed his lightsaber to R2-D2, and they followed the commander to a speeder. The destination was the royal palace, and Anakin used the journey to formulate an escape plan for himself, and more importantly, any slaves he found at the auction. When they arrived, the queen was intrigued as to why Danar had summoned her, and the slaver explained the man they had just detained. The queen asked her commander to leave Anakin and R2-D2 to her, much to his bemusement, as they were blatantly trying to infiltrate the slave empire. Despite his warnings, the queen's interest in Anakin won over, and she decided to take him to the market outside of the palace. As Sintel proudly showed the variety of slaves on display, Anakin was struggling to contain his anger when he spotted something that diverted his attention. Beside a cage containing an enslaved Ugnaught, Anakin saw a separatist insignia on a crate, and he wondered what dealings the Ziggerians had with Dooku. The Queen must have noticed Anakin's keen eye, as she told him that the separatists had expressed an interest in their slaves, and Dooku was arriving for a visit. Anakin almost stopped in his tracks, and he called for a change of plan. Anakin decided to charm the Queen, and he bought himself some time to examine the slaves by himself. The guards from the lookout towers kept an eye on him, but Anakin was able to discreetly use the Force to release the shackles from the slaves, and unlock the doors to their cages before the auction began. As it happened, these precautions were unnecessary when Anakin was taken to the backstage of the auction located in the palace. The gang of Ziggerian guards that had met Anakin on his arrival were accosting the slaves, so he used a mind trick on as many of the slaves as he could. This had the effect of convincing the slaves to continue playing their role, but to be prepared for when Anakin would make a dramatic intervention. The Queen then instructed Anakin to join her in auctioning the slaves on one of the upper levels, but upon entering the lavish room, he was faced with the unpleasant sight of Count Dooku. The separatist leader had arrived ahead of the Queen's schedule to examine the slaves, and he was surprised to recognize Skywalker through the thin slot in his headwear. Dooku was aware that Anakin had left the Order, and he was confused by his presence, because he didn't think he would go to a place that reminded him of his troubled childhood. Anakin remained silent, remembering his recklessness in their previous encounter on Geonosis, and Dooku asked why Anakin was here. The Queen was also intrigued, and turned away from the first slaves being brought out. Anakin pressed a button on his wrist-mounted communicator behind his back, and this was a signal to R2-D2 to let the chaos begin. During his trip around the palace, Anakin had strategically placed a variety of incendiaries, and now he planned for the Queen and her empire to fall. Anakin leapt out from the balcony, and with his lightsaber ignited, he both slashed any falling rubble and also freed any slaves in his vicinity. The surprised Ziggerian guards were torn between holding the escaping slaves, apprehending Anakin and saving their own lives, and Dinar screamed over the top of the noise to focus on the slaves. The commander's eyes narrowed as he scanned his eyes through the chaos, and he soon identified Anakin. With a growl of fury, he skillfully twisted his electro-whip to forge a path for himself, with no care for his own guards, and he approached within fighting distance of Anakin. Dinar demanded Anakin fight him in hand-to-hand combat, instead of relying on his Jedi tricks, but Anakin was not a Jedi. Not anymore. Anakin released one of his hands from his lightsaber, and he directed the falling debris straight onto Dinar's location. The Ziggerian used a combination of agile movement and his electro-whip to dodge the attack, and he managed to coil the whip around Anakin's ankles. Anakin fell and was slowly being dragged on the ground, but he dug in with his lightsaber. He then suddenly felt the pressure being released, and he turned around to find a group of slaves pummeling at the Ziggerian with an assortment of weapons until he laid still. The former Jedi ordered everyone to go, and he escorted the slaves out of the arena-like area until he was the last one remaining. The crumbling palace trailed the escaping slaves, but as Anakin was about to join the others in a slave transport, he was faced by Dooku again. Anakin ordered R2-D2 to find them alternative transport, and this time he aimed to fight the Sith. As the slave transports headed away from Ziggerian to safety, Anakin couldn't help but smile that he had succeeded in freeing the slaves, and Dooku had failed. The Sith knew this too, and sent a powerful lightning attack towards Anakin, but unlike on Geonosis, Anakin blocked it. The Sith then launched a variety of debris at Anakin, and Anakin was forced to move and deflect the projectiles with his lightsaber. As he fended off the last of the objects, Dooku was now directly in front of him with his lightsaber, and Anakin adjusted his form to face the master duelist. The two former Jedi danced across the platform as an intrigued audience watched on, but eventually Anakin began to falter against Dooku's flawless technique. Anakin now spotted a freighter piloted by R2-D2 hovering in the air and somersaulted onto the ramp, out of range of Dooku. The Sith reattached his lightsaber back onto his belt, in acknowledgement that this duel had met a premature end, and he offered Anakin the same opportunity that was given to Obi-Wan on Geonosis, to join him and defeat the Sith. Like his old master, Anakin refused, especially in light of Dooku's connections with the slave trade. The mission to free the slaves and its success had also settled Anakin's purpose outside of the Jedi Order, so with a mocking salute, he ran up the ramp of the ship and headed away from Dooku and Ziggerian. As he took reign of the ship's controls, he decided to return to Coruscant to meet with Padme, and the journey allowed him to reflect on his mission. Though he had succeeded in freeing the slaves, Anakin felt the lives of the slaves were put under far too much risk. His failure to defeat Dooku confirmed that he was not as powerful as he thought, and he needed help from other Force users. The former Jedi now devised a way to lure some of his former colleagues out of the Order to join him, as he formed his own faction. With this new plan in place, Anakin returned to Coruscant and travelled to the Senate office building. As it happened, his actions on Zygerian had caused quite the stir within the Senate, and his presence amongst the corridors was met with mixed emotions. Anakin entered Padme's office after greeting C-3PO, and his wife was one of the more supportive and positive voices in the Senate. Though Dooku's involvement in the slave empire was exposed, and Anakin had saved the slaves, his actions were being twisted as too aggressive on his part. Some saw him as a loose cannon, now without the instructions of the Jedi, and others questioned why the Jedi Order had stood still and allowed the rise of Queen Sintel's regime. Anakin now told Padme's vision to create a new Force faction, and the Senator wasn't sure. She felt the galaxy needed a united Jedi Order to help the Republic, but she couldn't deny that the Jedi had become less effective and also less attentive to the civilians. After a further debate evaluating the benefits and downfalls, Anakin decided to proceed with his vision, and he also wanted to recruit members of the clone army, as he felt some were being treated harshly by their Jedi superiors. The former Jedi left Padme's office and set up a meeting with Obi-Wan at Dex's diner to get his final thoughts. When the knight and his master reunited, Obi-Wan told Anakin that the reaction was as mixed in the Jedi as those in the Senate office building. This intrigued Anakin, and he eyed those who supported his actions. Anakin now told Obi-Wan his plan, and he could tell that it placed the master in a dilemma. Nevertheless, Obi-Wan promised to spread the word of Anakin's new faction, and the two parted ways. Whilst he waited for news from the temple, Anakin spent the next few days recruiting other allies. Visits to the clone barracks, the archives and the Senate followed, and Anakin had formed a secure foundation for his new order. The following weeks for Anakin were filled with more visits to promising planets, which he could use to build a base, and he created a list of candidates. A temporary gathering spot was organised at an abandoned Jedi outpost in the Outer Rim, and Anakin began to restore the station to bring it back to life. The space station was formerly a part of the Jedi Order's ambitious plan to explore the Outer Rim, but it had been abandoned for 200 years. Now, Anakin and R2-D2 first revived any other droids, then spread them across the station. The communications hub was the first to be repaired, and Anakin discovered that a heavy cruiser full of Jedi had left Coruscant, and they were set to meet him to join his order. With this piece of good news, Anakin doubled his efforts to restore the outpost in time for their arrival, and this included the hangar bays, defense mechanisms and meditation areas. But with several days to go until the scheduled arrival, Anakin received unexpected news from Coruscant. In the repaired and upgraded communications center, the lights above the ceiling crackled as Anakin turned them on, and he pressed the primary button on the holoprojector to bring up the hologram of Obi-Wan. The Jedi Master looked considerably more worn and downbeat compared to their previous meeting, and he revealed that the cruiser containing the Jedi had mysteriously vanished from their scanners. Anakin had a sinking feeling that their fate was already sealed, but nevertheless, he asked Obi-Wan if he could borrow some of his 212th Battalion, as the 501st Legion were on another mission. Given the seriousness of the situation, the Jedi Council had already assigned Obi-Wan and Plo Koon to investigate the disappearance, and Obi-Wan gave Anakin the coordinates of a rendezvous point. As the hologram of the Jedi Master disappeared, Anakin sank to the cold floor, and the guilt of the losses of the Jedi weighed heavily upon him. He remembered the loss of Ahsoka, and R2-D2 let out a sad series of beeps. Anakin now knew that this was the time to return to Tatooine. As it was close to the coordinates given by Obi-Wan, Anakin did not hesitate and leapt into his starfighter in the newly built hangar. Setting course for Tatooine, Anakin took one last look towards the nearly complete space station. Since Anakin's previous visit to Tatooine, the world had only occasionally been touched by the Clone War, but the scars of Anakin's massacre still remained. His name was spoken in hushed whispers, and on his approach, the memories of the past started to weigh upon him. Anakin landed his starfighter by the Valley of the Spirits and near the site of his massacre. As he looked below, Anakin was surprised to see Tuskens amidst the ruined tents and bones. He surveyed the entire encampment when he heard a scream from one of the tents, and he leapt into action. Driven by what had happened to Shmi, Anakin ran down the valley with his lightsaber by his side, and the Tuskens soon took notice. The ghost that they thought had haunted the camp had come to life, and chaos ensued. Tuskens were either running out of the valley or charging with their gaffy sticks, but Anakin had learned from his previous visit, and he did enough to repel the Tuskens whilst keeping them alive. Bursting through to the tent, Anakin rescued the captured moisture farmer and returned them to the Great Shot salt flats, and he soon received a transmission from Obi-Wan. The Jedi was approaching the coordinates of the disappearing cruiser of Jedi, and he wanted Anakin to investigate the huts to see if they knew what had happened. Anakin begrudgingly agreed to Obi-Wan's plan, and he promised to report to him after meeting with the huts. As the hologram of Obi-Wan faded, Anakin looked at the moisture farmer he had just rescued, and realised that he had not been thinking about the biggest threat, which was those behind the wall. Anakin now felt determined to help defeat the Separatists, which in turn would allow the Jedi to help him tackle the widespread slavery, and restore them to their previous roles as peacekeepers. Solely focused on Obi-Wan's request, Anakin made his way to Jabba's palace, and after passing the gatekeeper droid and handing over his lightsaber to the guards, he walked to the throne room. Anakin did not bow in front of Jabba, and with the guards pointing their weapons at his face, Anakin bravely told the Hutt about the vanishing Jedi near the system. The Great Hutt let out a large belch, and in a slow and deliberate voice, he told Anakin that he had no knowledge of such an incident. The former Jedi's Huttese was rusty, but he could sense deceit in Jabba's voice. Just as Anakin was about to respond, a hologram appeared between them, and it was unmistakably Dooku. Anakin wasted no time in pointing accusingly at the Sith, and he demanded answers. Dooku's expression remained stoic, and he claimed no personal involvement in the disappearance. Anakin knew there was nothing more to extract from Dooku, but as with Jabba, his voice was echoing with deceit. With that in mind, Anakin dashed out of the throne room as Dooku's hologram faded, retrieved his lightsaber, and deflected any blaster bolts back onto the palace walls, before dashing out of the exit. Anakin returned to his ship, and told Obi-Wan about the encounter with Dooku and Jabba, and the Master was also suspicious of the Sith. Obi-Wan, Plo Koon and Anakin met in the Tatooine system, and they spread out squadrons of cloned starfighters which the Jedi brought, across the Arcanis sector. The search took several days, until one of the squadrons found space debris above Geonosis. The Jedi and Anakin were back where it all started, and they began to think of a list of gruesome things that could have happened to the Jedi. The two council members contemplated asking the other council members for their help, but such was the distance to Geonosis, they feared that whatever laid on the planet could escape. A brief preliminary scan showed a gathering of Nantex-class starfighters, to go with the usual assortment of air defences and command spheres. A hastily thought out plan was constructed by the Jedi, Anakin and the leading clones, and it prioritised the entry of Obi-Wan and Anakin, as well as using the larger destroyers and cruisers to block off any enemy escapes. The first move was made by the BTLB Y-Wings and bombers, and they dived down to engage the Nantex-class starfighters. The skies of Geonosis were quickly darkened by the battle, but amidst it all, two Jedi starfighters plunged down towards the ground. With the Keldor Master serving as reinforcement and taking control of the fleet, the familiar pairing of Anakin and Obi-Wan graced the field of battle again, and they were accompanied by a multitude of low-altitude assault gunships. These contained clone paratroopers, and they were deployed to tackle the command spheres, leaving Obi-Wan and Anakin to hunt for the missing Jedi. The Master and Padawan looked for any signs of suspicious separatist activity, until landing beside one of the planet's rock formations, but after finding nothing, they deployed the clones in R2-D2 to use their life scanners. Obi-Wan did not have high hopes for this search, as he suspected any activity would be within one of the native hives below ground. As they waited for the results of the search, Commander Cody unexpectedly informed them of news from above the surface. Plo Koon was locked in a battle with the Separatist battleships, but soon he was trapped by Separatist reinforcements. Obi-Wan and Anakin knew the Keldor Master could not survive indefinitely, so they had to find the missing Jedi quickly, and decided to look for any Geonosians in their hives. After searching through the first few hives, which turned out to be empty, Obi-Wan and Anakin received reports from the scouting team. Their scanners had shown activity near the droid factories, but these were being guarded by entire armies of droids. In their forward command center, Cody pointed out the areas they could target on the holographic map, but Anakin and Obi-Wan were now convinced that their targets were underground. The clones followed the Jedi plan, and they quickly switched the map to the underground maze. Little was known about the true extent of these passageways, other than the basic structure of these hives, but the Progate Temple was their first target. Anakin, Obi-Wan and the clones snuck past the station droids, but knew that they would return later, and they slowly descended into the catacombs. The lightsaber wielders ignited their weapons, and the clones turned on their headlights as they looked for the Jedi. As they continued their scans, Obi-Wan was surprised by the absence of Geonosians, but Anakin soon smelt the stench of bodies. The clones reflexively pointed their headlights at the walls, and they were plastered with Geonosians. Clone Trooper Waxer broke the brief silence by pointing to a room that was ahead of them, and Anakin and Obi-Wan peered around a wall to a horrifying sight. The missing Jedi were suffering an even worse fate than death, as they had become the subject of a series of gruesome experiments. The lair of Queen Karina the Great had been transformed into a laboratory, and the only Geonosian present was Poggle the Lesser. Anakin's eyes narrowed, and waving off Obi-Wan's attempts to stop him, he swiped open the door with the Force, then seized Poggle by the throat. Anakin ordered him to release all the Jedi at once, and as he coughed and sputtered, Anakin and Obi-Wan felt an ominous presence in the Force. Once more, Dooku stood in front of them, seemingly always one step ahead of them. Unlike on Ziggerian, there was no escape for Anakin. The former knight had reflected on his last duel with Dooku, and realised he hadn't played to his advantages. Now beneath the surface of Geonosis, he saw Obi-Wan moving behind him to release the Jedi from their Force cages, and Anakin was grateful that his master could read his intentions. Anakin moved purposefully to Dooku, and opting to use his power instead of finding a flaw in Dooku's technique, he started to push Dooku back. Whilst they moved further into the newly excavated area, Obi-Wan and the clones used the territory gained to free more Jedi, but many of them had already passed the point of no return. The Jedi Master became increasingly horrified with every step that he took, and as he led the clones to a separate wing, he inadvertently stepped into the lair of Grievous. Unlike the one on Vasek 3, this one was inhabited by more than one medical droid, and in fact, there were Geonosian scientists working on modifications and enhancements. Obi-Wan knew the stories of the cyborg's power, which originated from Geonosis itself, and whilst the cyborg was tethered, he knew he had to strike. A small signal with his hand triggered the clones into action, and as they targeted the Geonosian warriors and scientists, Obi-Wan lunged at the cyborg. Grievous detected the danger with his receptors, but tied to the medical table, he could only manage to shift his torso to the side to deflect the attack. The blue blade was wedged within the Durasteel and Duranium armor, and Obi-Wan used the Force to rotate the weapon, and the vital organs of Grievous were eviscerated into dust. Obi-Wan was relieved that the duel had been somewhat anticlimactic, as he didn't know if he could have outdueled the cyborg. The demise of the cyborg was sensed by Dooku, and Anakin smirked with satisfaction. The Sith was annoyed by his failure to anticipate the Jedi's surprise attack, whilst Grievous was undergoing repairs, but Master Kenobi was heading into a trap. As Anakin continued his relentless assault, there was a sudden rumble from the ceiling, and everyone dived for cover. Dooku quickly ducked into a secret passageway that he had constructed, which led to a turbolift to the surface, but everyone else was scrambling for survival. Anakin was initially pinned down by a number of rocks, but pushed them off of him with the Force, and he shouted through his wrist-mounted comlink for Obi-Wan, but there was no response. After calls for the clones were also met with silence, Anakin got to his feet and saw that Dooku's escape chute was covered in rubble and most likely destroyed. Most of the laboratory was also out of commission, and Anakin searched for any sign of life. Out of the corner of a pile of debris, R2-D2 glided back to his master, and Anakin was glad to see his little blue friend. Anakin helped to repair R2-D2's lifeform scanner, and the astromech detected life behind a large wall of rubble. Now Anakin could hear the faint groans of pain, and he asked R2-D2 to begin freeing them, whilst he looked for a way back to the surface. The trap had destroyed much of the previous path, and Anakin was relying mainly on the Force. His route took him into uncharted territory, but eventually he found another laboratory, which appeared to be an extension of the one which was destroyed. The reinforced walls and ceiling pointed to this laboratory's importance, and Anakin soon identified a doorway leading to the surface, but then he felt a chill through his spine. Anakin raised his lightsaber and panned his eyes around the room when he heard a familiar voice from the shadows. The man he had once trusted, known as Palpatine, stepped out, but he was nothing like the man Anakin knew. The Sith Lord who was standing before him had once considered Anakin a replacement for Dooku, but after recent events, he was now a threat. To Sidious, Anakin's latest foray into a secret experiment was the final straw, and this knowledge could not be leaked beyond the catacombs, so he ignited his lightsabers. Anakin sensed the threat, but almost failed to see the blur of red light as Palpatine aimed to dispose of him. The reflexes of Anakin allowed him to escape the encounter with a scratch on his shoulder, but it was obvious that he was outmatched. As Sidious toyed with Anakin, the younger of the duelists was desperately searching for anything that could delay the inevitable. Anakin continued to retreat back to the first laboratory when he heard a chain of explosions. Unknown to either Sidious or Anakin, Dooku was using this opportunity to eliminate his master, and he ordered the droids above them to drop barrels of rhydonium into the hive. Colourful explosions blazed through the hive, and Anakin ran for his life. The falling rocks tumbled all around him, and Anakin darted from side to side until he found R2-D2. The astromech had uncovered the missing Obi-Wan, and the Jedi Master was fighting for his life. No one else was alive, and a quick inspection of the clones found lightsaber wounds. The distinct curvature and precision of the wounds pointed to Dooku, and Anakin knew the Sith's previously buried escape route was in this direction. With Obi-Wan over his shoulder, Anakin sighed through the remaining rubble until he emerged in a transparent steel passageway. With the hive about to collapse, R2-D2 repaired the damaged turbolift, and the trio ascended to the surface. Anakin kept his lightsaber ignited, and when he finally saw light, he asked his droid to guard Obi-Wan. Carrying the losses of the clone troopers to Jedi, Ahsoka and Shmi, Anakin saw his exit was blocked by a circle of B2 super battle droids, and he saw the stern look of Dooku behind them. Anakin launched a massive force push in all directions, which sent the droids everywhere, including at the Sith. Dooku was now sporting a series of lacerations, but before Anakin could slice his head off, he was surprised to be blocked off by Plo Koon. The Keldor Master had called for reinforcements, but evacuated his flagship after the Separatist pincer movement, and he sensed Anakin and Obi-Wan needed his help. Now, the Master prevented Anakin from killing Dooku, expressing a desire for the Council to interrogate the Sith, so he made a clean cut around his wrist. Anakin wanted to protest, but he knew that his work was complete. Obi-Wan was taken by the Wolf Pack to the closest medical bay, whilst the survivors waited for the reinforcements to arrive, but before they left, Plo Koon wanted to speak to Anakin, much to his surprise. The Master told him that no amount of revenge would ever bring back the losses, and he also carried the loss of Ahsoka, as he had been the one to bring her to the temple. Anakin now understood, after all of his efforts since Christophsis, and with a final nod to the Jedi, he walked into the gunship and set off for his next adventure.